Greetings, folks. Welcome to another Marvel Avengers Alliance Redux video on G4G. As always, and as you would expect, I'm Napalm Dawn, fresh off of my lovely dinner, cooked by my wonderful girlfriend, and a nice small can of Red Bull. So I am ready for the weekend. Work is over. Let's go ahead and get into it. So in this video, we're going to discuss the 5th anniversary Q&A. We have questions and answers from the coders, the writers, artists, and development team. But before we get into those questions and answers, which might make this video a little bit long, so bear with me. This is probably good for a more podcast style one that you're not going to have to look at the screen much past this first one. So if you've got a nice, long, boring commute or car ride, it might be good for that. But this first part over here, I'm going to do a little bit of a guessing game with you guys. So when 5.2 drops, that's beta 5.2, it is going to be a minor update to 5.01 that will fix some weapons and common combat-related issues like counters, follow-ups, things like that. Gear that makes use of those abilities in game will largely be fixed. So that is what is happening with 5.2. I do not have the timeline as to when it will be out yet, but I can tell you that the closed beta team has been working on it. I've downloaded it myself but haven't played it yet, and I don't want to do a video on 5.2 until it's actually ready, because it is still a work in progress. And I want you guys to see the final product rather than the construction behind the scenes. So, in 5.2, 2 characters are going to be available in 5.2 that were not available in 5.01. And I'm going to set you guys up for a little guessing game on that. Now, if you watched some of the previous videos, I think you already know who one of them is. But I'm going to pretend that you don't, and I will give you 2 clues per character. For the first character, one of them is going to be audio and visual, and then the second one is going to be 2 visual guides only. So for the first character that you need to guess, this character said that Wolverine, quote, isn't a very good fighter. He's a brawler, but he's not particularly skillful. So this character said that of Wolverine. You can imagine the 2 of them being somewhat similar in combat, but the fact that one of them is saying this of Wolverine, you can imagine the other one is a bit more refined and graceful and elegant. In Marvel Future Fight, that character, because he, and I will say that he, fulfills a similar role to Wolverine in the game, he is often called the poor man's Wolverine, because he's easier and cheaper to build. So he's called the poor man's Wolverine in Marvel Future Fight, and he said that Wolverine really isn't a particularly good fighter. He's just a brawler that relies on his health regeneration. Now, the next clue for that character will be this. Try not to look at the bottom part of the screen. I hid the URL in the tab. But just look at the character on the screen, and I think that is perhaps a easy guess over there as to who one of the characters will be in Beta 5.2. So, moving on, we're now going to discuss the second character that has not been revealed at all, that will be in 5.2 for you to play around with. This one's going to be tough, but I think comic lore fans, the actuary guy from The Simpsons, will probably get these hints over here. So one of the first clue is going to be 2 pictures, and then the second clue is going to be 3 pictures. So, moving on, here is the first picture for the first clue to the character. Not really going to reveal too much about this over here. maybe just take it at face value. It's weird, the entry lights over there by the front door kind of look like beer bottles. That is not intentional. Just take in the gestalt of this picture. Think of a word that describes this. So that is word 1 of the clue. And here was word 2 of the clue. So those two pictures go together. You have the picture beforehand and this. So cycling back, picture 1, picture 2. So that is clue number 1 for the second character. Now, we're going to have 3 pictures in a row that also are a clue to the same character. There's maybe potentially a word, maybe multiple words here that apply. This is the first part of the clue. Here is the second word of the clue somewhere on the screen. A little hint to this character. And there's Wolverine. He is perhaps maybe an example of the final word of this particular clue. So we'll go through it again over here. The first clue over here has this picture and that picture. By the way, aside from guessing who the character is, try to guess the references down in the comments below. I think you comic people should definitely get it. I would get it because maybe I actually own this, and you've maybe paid attention in other videos where I've discussed one of the few things of this type of thing that I actually own. I don't own that many of them, but I own this one over here. So, and then here is picture number 1 of the second clue. Picture number 2. And picture number 3. Okay, so guess the 2 characters and guess the references. The audio clue, obviously, that is the reference. I've basically given it to you there and paraphrased it. That is just a clue to the character, but the very first picture over there, guess who that is, and guess who that is the clue towards. All right, so let's get on to the Q&A. First, the coders are answering, then the writers, the artist, development, and in general. So question 1, what are your thoughts on the progress between Beta 4 and 5? Well, this is out there now. You can see the difference. You are playing Beta 5.01, so we will skip this one pretty quickly. Goofy and Bridget Rocks, who I'll refer to as BR from here out, have basically said the difference is immeasurable and it's quite immense. How grindy will the game be? Hopefully the grind will be balanced. A lot will depend on your luck on the roulettes. By the way, the roulettes are now perfectly balanced. The roulettes, when they were under Play Dom, were weighted towards giving you the trash and unweighted towards giving you the good items like gold, ISOs, the gear, and everything like that. So say you were farming the mission for the power of 4, that was not actually a 1 in 9 chance the way you thought it would be. It was more like 25%, and then the other squares were weighted to be like 75%. So you only had like a 25% chance to get the gear, or like a 10% chance, and all the other ones were weighted higher. Goofy has balanced the gambling behind it to be that everything has a 1 in 9 chance to be picked. So every square has a equal chance to every other square, because there is no monetary exchange for this. So there is no desire to buy gold to use gold for respins and, use gold to skip time and buy energy when you're out of energy. This is no longer a monetized game, so a lot of the things that push you towards monetization won't be there. Some people have talked about, well, can I use gold to skip training? Because time was one of the resources that was consumed when the game was paid. You paid to skip time. However, battles will do that. A gold skip is not going to be implemented. If you're training somebody for a long time, well, then they're training for a while. Just train the long characters when you can play, and each battle cuts away at the time, and then the short characters either do that while you're playing too, or maybe do that while you're eating dinner, at work, sleeping, etc. Bridget Rock says, I'd say enough, but it not something that's impossible to do. With enough time and some clever pinpointing of new grinding spots, it's going to be hopefully good enough. Are all the gears been added to the game yet? Well, you can see in 5 a lot of them have. The answer is most purchasable gear is in the game, with a handful of them needing assets. Others will be added as their proper missions and spec ops are finished. So if you are looking for, say, the Crooked Branch, you're going to have to wait till that spec ops where you are facing Loki. As an example, you're not just going to see it in a chapter. Will PvAI metas be recreated, meaning that those that have been phased out due to nerfs will lead to nerfs being undone? For example, ghost protecting. Goofy is saying that nerfs will not be undone without a valid reason. Hopefully PvAI will not have to be adjusted too much. That's what they're going to be testing for in Beta 6. So if you remember, like back in the day, you could have phase characters tank, and because they were unhittable, they were essentially a brick wall. They wouldn't really take any damage. There was a way of continually hiding the agent that was never actually fixed, but the agent wasn't tanking per se. There was a certain gear setup that would allow the agent to be phased every turn, and unless you had magic or a way of hitting phase characters, you were going to have to quit the battle. I actually did attack a team way back in the day that had this, and it involved like blink boots, I think maybe the Sinister Scepter, and the person set it up very, very well that the agent stayed phased the entire match, and I had to quit because there was nothing I could do. Very, very sneaky. I don't remember all the gear. I would say some of it was passive, like the Hugin's Eye, or maybe the Moon's Eye, and then just basically maybe the Scepter and the Blink Boots. Very, very interesting setup. I had to give kudos to that person. BR says, like Goofy said, we'll be very careful about what we undo. It is a good point about the recreated metas, but since they will be recreated by humans, we can take into account that X character is lacking a feature that got nerfed. So you're not going to see a Kitty Pryde defensive phased tanking meta because that it can't exist anymore. What were the hardest coding obstacles or bugs? Goofy says the status complexities by far are the hardest obstacle. We've seen that throughout all the betas. It's been very apparent that it's been tough. I would fix some only to break others. BR says some examples of what Goofy said about statuses are the counters, Hawkeye's rapid fire, which you people have seen, Kitty Pryde's phased. That took a while. How many animators does the team have? We have a handful of animators, from spriters to flash animators to people working on converting the files. What that means is people converting the old Flash animation files to Unity animation files. It's all part of the bigger process. Is a character hard to implement code-wise? The answer from Goofy Troll is War Machine and Hawkeye have been a pain. Both have a lot of similar statuses that trigger their follow-up attacks. War Machine's overcharge and Hawkeye's rapid fire, for example, they are the actual main reason the beta file release was taking so long, which we know that's now out-of-date information. It's out. What will control when covert tasks unlock? That's a very good question here. They will be unlocked after the chapter that unlocked before them in the original release. All unlocks for that chapter will be spread out across missions 1 to 5. So, where they fell in the old timeline is basically where you're going to see it. If you don't remember what covert ops were, they were things like building that gauntlet that had like the Wolverine claw, but the Captain America shield and the Spider-Man part of it, the web blaster. That was an example of a covert op. The chitter chatter box for Squirrel Girl. It was, I think that maybe was something related to Squirrel Girl that we built, or maybe it was something that had the same icon as the chitter chatter box. But yeah, covert ops and covert tasks and everything were small, quick things that you did to buy do-over for bigger content. Will we have more than 2 training rooms? Goofy says, I don't see the reason for it. We've added a time skip for each combat, so playing speeds up training, or you can wait while you're away. I would think until... I mean, you'd have to have an incredible amount of characters on the roster to think of a 3rd training room. How does the transfer from Flash to Unity work? Well, we found the free utility that converts the original files from Flash to Unity. So we set up the animation Flash and then we run the exporter. This is what happened later. In the beginning, people were doing this by hand. Now there is a conversion tool. What was the hardest part of statuses? Goofy says, the timing of multi-part sequences, for example, Hawkeye's rapid fire. If he has the counter applied, it does some behind-the-scenes shit where actually it applies a new counter based on which uniform is equipped. That counter is then supposed to trigger and do a follow-up attack to the actual target. That follow-up is what was causing the problems, and it's still not triggering properly. Many of the statuses have several steps, and even if a single line of code is wrong or out of place, that's what causes the breakdown. What storylines are you hoping to adapt? Ooh, this is a good question. So we're now down here in the writer section, even though it's blue over there. Good question. I want to know the answer to this one too. A general guideline that we've been following as writers is that we may be inspired by pre-existing source material like comic storylines, movies, or TV shows. Redux is its own thing, so no story in the game will be a one-to-one adaptation of pre-existing work. That makes sense because if you remember, MAA did take liberties like who was a worthy, who was the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and everything. And while there were some iterations where they did exist outside of Marvel Avengers Alliance, like the worthy, for example, is a good thing of where they took people who were originally worthy, took their uniforms and names and gave them to completely different people. Like Juggernaut was Kurth, but here we got Spider-Woman being it, and Things worthy went over to Damien Hellstrom, if I remember correctly there. And some of that even changed, like who Ghost Rider became. I think originally was going to go to what's her nuts? It's not Titania, it's the damn, I did a team up of that lady with Star-Lord. They were going to make it her Thundra. Thundra was going to be a worthy for a little while, but because Thundra belonged to the Fantastic Four side, and they couldn't touch Fantastic Four property at that point, Thundra was not a worthy. And I do believe the art out there, the example art, is actually real. I don't believe it's fan-made. But we were going to have Thunder as a worthy. So that's kind of an example of what they're talking about over here. Adding our own spin is a win-win for everyone since it allows the writers to be more creative. Also remember, we're not games industry people. The coders are not, quote-unquote, in the industry. So it's not like Netmarble and Marvel Future Fight where they can get to see the movie early so they can develop, say, an epic or heroic mission that when the movie releases, it's already in game, and then the game mirrors the movie. None of the coding team's going to have, or the development team's going to have that early access to the Marvel's movie and then can make a Spec Ops that mirrors the Marvel movie until they actually go see it, if that's what they actually chose to do. So that was Ken who said this over here. Also, for the record, the original writers added their own spin when they did their own adaptations, like the MCU tie-in with the Spec Ops. Here, Wild Rider is saying, with all of that being said, I'm a big fan of more humorous takes on Marvel, like the MCU Squeenix versions of Guardians of the Galaxy, great game by the way, Next Wave, Superior Foes of Spider-Man, etc. I'd like to incorporate elements of those stories. A bit of a tricky one to do for MAAR, says Diabetic Kirby, but I'd love to do some sort of play off of the Sins of Sinister. I love the concept of 4 competing ideas of evolution working against each other. Metacron says, I'm a big X-Men fan. I'd like to include more of their stories and related teams. Panda says, Secret Invasion just to show the MCU how it's done. Still bitter about that. I can understand. I found it watchable, but yeah, it definitely gets a lot of hate. What were the easiest and hardest characters to write for? So Panda, or Ken, is the one answering this here for this first part. The challenge isn't a specific character, but to make the tone of the character's dialogue consistent and not subject to random changes in their speech pattern that are depicted one way and then later in a completely different way. So if you're going to make that sort of change, it needs to be consistent. For example, Wolverine in most media has consistently used the term bub. It'd be very clashing for him to start using bra instead. It's an obstacle introduced in the writing process that when multiple writers submit material, they all come from different perspectives and preferred ways of stating something, and it becomes the burden of the editor to bring the different voices into one voice. So yes, writing a character is easy, editing it is not. And Panda says characters that are meant to be humdrum are hard to write for. I can tell you, seeing the inner workings of the writing team, these guys go to absolute great lengths to make sure that there's unification. There's a lot of complexity behind the scenes for the writing team. And after we get to question number 3 over here, I'll kind of sum up some stuff over there. I'm going to wait until this third question, but suffice to say that for now, a short little nugget on it, they do a tremendous amount of work in heavily noting and heavily documenting what everybody does and what they say and what the tone is, so that person A could use that character in chapter 1, person B can use that character in chapter 2, and they're going to have the same style, the same essence. What is your favorite thing to write out of Spec Ops chapters, covert tasks, one-shots, etc.? They're all, so this is Ken talking over here. They're all fun, but each has its own merits. Spec Ops tasks and one-shots offer the most flexibility from his perspective and personal opinion. Chapters need to intertwine over a prolonged period for the season, where more instances can occur which break your own continuity, because you're writing for a large span of time with your focus narrowed to current events as opposed to the events that preceded or were waiting to happen. Spec Ops are more concise, and the option can be directly tied to a chapter event, but they can also have certain degrees of independence from the main story. One-shots have the most degree of flexibility, giving the writer ultimate freedom to experiment with a point of view, like filling out parallel events or working with a premise that doesn't work in any other formats. Having submitted some of my own Spec Ops and everything like that, I can tell you I like writing a Spec Ops because it can sort of exist within a box, but when you have what many in the community considers like an NPC, like a Phil Coulson or a Fury or Professor X who comes in and talks to people, but they don't actually participate in combat and do anything. You have to take into account what they've said before and what their attitude is in the past, and where is that character going to go in the future. So I personally have fun writing for Spec Ops because I also get to, aside from dialogue, I get to invent gear and maybe a uniform or a character, and then try to figure out what the character's abilities and passives would be without them being ridiculously overpowered. So since we are done with the writing section over here, or are we? There's a 4, but there isn't a 4 in the index. Okay, no, we're not done. There's a 4th question over here. Thoughts about the writing team over the course of 5 years. Okay, so this is long, so I'll say it now. The master and commander of the writing team unfortunately passed away a while back. He was known as Michael. To people knew him directly on Facebook, or Black Max to the community. His spirit and essence lives on today for the writers. Michael was a phenomenal individual, at times being brash and outspoken and headstrong and maybe a little fly off the handle-ish, but also deeply, deeply committed to the project and unity in the project, making sure threads that, or ties and threads that bind, go all the way through from start to finish. Meticulous note-taking. The team is soldiering on without him, but it is a tremendous loss to the team, as he was definitely the commander of forces over there when it came to the writing team. So a moment of silence for Black Max before we move on to the final question from the writers category. Moving on. Thoughts about the writing team over the course of 5 years. This is okay. So the first section is going to be Ken. I'll try to skim this one a little bit, as it is kind of long, and I actually do see a reference to BM over here. The preface, Ken says, at the start of this is a personal opinion, not representative of the rest of the team. The game staff, there are game staff that have been here since the beginning, and then there are some that have joined along the journey. There are game staff that have left for either personal reasons, or importantly, those that we still wish were with us. It's been at times a confusing and complex mishmash of philosophies, opinions, and perspectives, and where leadership styles have occasionally clashed. In the earliest era of the writing team, they were advised to throw everything at the wall for the ideas for Season 3. Personally speaking, Ken showed up at the tail end of this. The suggestions and the work in progress certainly reflected that kind of environment. There was a little structure, and the tone of the work in progress material was often inconsistent, and you lacked focus. There was little consideration for the development weight that was being done by the writers in its effect on the art and coding teams. I'm sad to hear that, because I've always tried to highlight the writing team as much as possible, and I know coding is the skeleton of it, and the art is like, what good is the writing and creating a character if nobody can art it up? No, there are no artists to create it or sprite it or animate it. But I will say that saddens me to hear writers feel that they were unappreciated and underrated, because I always had strong faith in them and always tried to highlight their work as much as possible, and also discuss how incredibly tough it is to be on the writing team. It may seem like one of the easiest jobs out there, but it absolutely is not when consistency is at play. And when you are writing a game as long in the tooth as Redux could be over continued years of future development and everything. So Ken continues to say that the era of the writing team that would follow under the helm of Black Max, BM used a style of leadership that I would compare to a drill sergeant. Yep, kind of sort of what I just said. And would drag your butt across the finish line. Well, that is the difference between a leader and a manager. A leader pulls and pushes you forward and is there with you. They may be a step behind pushing you, they may be a step in front of you pulling you, but they don't just skip along the outside of the course and get to the end and just say, come on, everybody catch up. A true leader is there, not cracking the whip for a bunch of human slaves to drag a stone across the field. They're there pushing with you, and you can see Ken is saying that of Black Max. The change in style when BM came on created structure and pushed consistency, and action figure smash is something they tried to avoid, like when young boys play with He-Man, Skeletor, and just smash them together. They began to create tools to track the continuity of characters and stories. They worked on creating processes for submissions to the writer's material. They communicated more. They would often have huddles to talk about this stuff. Productivity for Season 3 from a writing perspective increased tremendously, and things began to run like clockwork for a time. The writing process worked until it didn't work. If you recall what I said about the drill sergeant that would drag your butt across the finish line, sometimes with your own protests, the process didn't work so well in the later half of the write-up of Season 3. There were more than a handful of times where emotions got heated because contributing writers felt they were being overruled unilaterally by a lead editor. And sometimes this worked in other directions, and people got testy. In retrospect, I don't feel this was being done maliciously on BM's part, but collateral to his passion that he had for world building and writing. It's the same reason why creative conflicts come to a head in any group of co-workers. When BM's health began to fail, he chose a person who he felt had equal passion and the capability to lead and accomplish those tasks, and he gave it to Dubs. The writing process will continue to adapt to lessons learned as it is warranted, and just as there will always be, writers will join and depart. The tools which are used are the same, and importantly, the drive to create a cohesive story hasn't changed. That is the hard part. That's it right there in a nutshell. The cohesion. Panda says that he joined the team in 2018, having submitted a proposed chapter and SO that never got used because it was terrible. Yeah, been there. I don't know if I would consider my stuff terrible. That would be a harsh punishment to nail myself on. But I've submitted stuff that was rejected, and I have one that I can never talk about until it actually comes about that I need to refine. But there is one that there is interest on. Anywho, that was a wild time, so many people weren't around now, throwing ideas at the wall, seeing what stuck. BM was a leader for a short bit, but he hadn't found his rhythm as a leader yet. I remember getting lost in this vortex, and after weeks of trying and failing to get anything done, I phased out, and I stopped for a month and almost never came back. One November night, while Chapter 2 was being brainstormed, he stuck his head in, and he shot some ideas that BM really liked. He made sure to PM me and make sure I didn't disappear again. And he appointed me to do a rewrite of Chapter 2 because he wasn't satisfied with where the group was trying to take it. This was a large leap of faith for a 16-year-old who barely knew what was cemented in the team. And in a word, that's how I describe the last 5 years, one giant leap into faith. After a certain incident months into our first year, we tightened up our team and became apprehensive to newcomers, but occasionally there'd be a newcomer who'd show up with a glimmer of potential, and Black Max and I, meaning Panda, would PM and discuss if it's worth the leap. Every time we said yes, it was worth it, and despite the slow results, we're still here, chugging away. We've lost so many people, including BM, but despite the changing cast, the goals remain the same: to absolutely bring the best story they can, and to honor the stories that inspired us for decades and maybe our own, to the many tales of the multiverse through the game that they'll love. So the writer section is now done, and we are moving into the artists. So question 1, how long does a piece take? Metacron says, it depends on the character and how much free time we have. For me, sprite sheets take a week or two, sometimes even a month. However, there are talented people that can do them in a single day. Beck says, I think it relies on two factors: how over the top we go with the animations and the artist's mood. A good example of this is Killmonger, who we got to reveal last November. I envisioned him with some pretty complex animations, but was pretty messed up emotionally back then, so it took a whole year to develop. Others, like Horseman Elixir or Taserface, took less than a week. Jay says that it depends because I'm only able to deal with portrait arts and I'm a traditional artist. It takes anywhere from 2 hours to 3 days if I get detailed. And then BR says, like others have said, it's a matter of inspiration. I've done some of them in 2 hours, others take months. That's why I usually let the artist choose what to do from our list of needs, because I want them to have the right mindset and want to do the art for a specific character. Living with a girlfriend who does art from her own brain and also did art for pay, yeah, I can absolutely echo everything that was said there. It is one thing to be motivated when somebody commissions you or somebody says, we're doing a card game project. We want you to do 25-30% of the cards in the project. And you're going to get paid and you're going to get credit and all that stuff. And you're like, oh, wow, exposure. But when you're doing stuff that people say and you're submitting drafts and revisions and they come back and say, make this darker, or no, we were maybe looking for more of a death look here, or the arms like this, and you're like, and you got to revise it. It's tough. But when you do art for yourself, even though there is not monetary fulfillment, you have a lot of your own fulfillment. And Jason and I talk about that quite a bit, so I definitely understand that perspective for the artists. Do you find the MAA style hard to replicate? Metacron says not at all. After a little bit of practice making sprites and gear, it becomes easy. Portrait art is a real challenge. Beck says it only takes 1 or 2 attempts to mimic. It may look hard, but there's some tools that make it easier. Oh wow, a reference to Sam Wood. And Jay says a little bit yes. The art of Sam Wood was really my main inspiration in how I draw characters. Despite 5 or so years, I am unable to perfectly replicate it all the time, but my results do get there pretty well. And Bridget Rock says of sprite sheets, no, that's what I focus on as an artist. However, as art director, I do see the issue with replicating shadows, in particular to the MAA style of portrait arts. Jace, by the way, says sometimes it gets tough because he considers himself too much of a perfectionist in his own art. Question 3, are you able to reuse resources, or is everything new and laborious? I would say, from what I've seen, they can sort of like Lego things up a little bit, where they might take an arm and a head from this character and stick it onto a new character, so it's not as reusable as, say, the palette swaps of like Sub-Zero and Scorpion in the early days, or like the Ken and Ryu animations, but they I've seen them be able to successfully reuse pieces of resources. Metacron says most of the time we try to use existing materials as base for new stuff. There you go. However, it's not always possible. We may have to make our own. Fortunately, we have amazing artists that can help with that. Beck says it truly depends on who we're working with. There's stuff whose designs can be done with existing assets, but then sometimes there's stuff we have to build from scratch. And there's a character that I'm working on, meaning Beck, who has the largest amount of assets drawn from scratch from compared to the other sprites. I believe most characters, according to Bridget Rocks, can be done by reusing parts. To make Boom Boom, someone we've announced and shown the idol sprite for, I used Blade, Squirrel Girl, Emma Frost, Psylocke, Umar, and Chase Stein. If you know where to look, there's something to reuse most of the time. As we approach the end of the artists here, by the way, shout out to Cyrus Annihilator, who's always been very, very helpful about sprite stuff. And this goes back to even when Avengers Alliance was live. Shout out to Cyrus Annihilator over there. That is a name that should definitely remain in people's brains when we talk about art and sprite and everything. Have you created art for characters and alts that are not yet planned for the project? If so, will we see them someday? Jay says, "Oh, I've created plenty of art alls yet on plan. I have to commit these ideas to paper somehow, and I've drawn and colored them. I'm not about to spoil my own ideas, but I can say some are familiar, some are obscure." Now we are in the development section, and this is the story development team. Like, this is the flow of the game. This isn't development in terms of coding. We've done that. This is like plot and story development. How long does it take to make a character kit? Kelvin says it can depend. Speaking from experience, at least if the ideas are there, it's pretty quick. Otherwise, it's time consuming. Metacron says if you're familiar with the character, it's usually easy and takes less time. But on the contrary, it could take several days if you're working with an unfamiliar or obscure hero. Hello, Drax's daughter. The quickest would be a couple of hours. God, I can't think of what it was like to think of stuff for Cammy, who I always used to refer to as Velma from Scooby-Doo with a jetpack. It varies, according to Wild Rider, it varies from character to character. Sometimes I get a really good idea how to adapt a character and can write up a kit an hour or two later that night. Other times I have some vague ideas. I might jot them down one day and not return for a few days or even weeks. And then, I don't know who's answering this one. As others allude to, not all kits are made the same. To reference revealed content, Molly Hayes' P5 kit was done in less than 30 minutes, while Boom Boom's base kit and her HM kit were both hours-long efforts to patent. Other non-revealed examples have taken days as I make sure I get the proper effects and move ideas. So many characters tend to share commonalities, like fire users, so it's an extra effort to make each character feel unique, so future characters have an easier time making splash. Considering I've worked on some Spec Ops and I've invented characters too, yeah, you have to try and be balanced, and I think you have to try to make sure you don't go overboard. You're like, I'm designing this character that's getting put in the game, and you don't want to make the character cosmically powerful, like like a Galactus Herald or Galactus himself or Ego. I mean, yeah, it's, you have to show restraint, but you also have to stick to your theme. One of the characters that I had proposed, and I can mention this one because it was in a rejected part, was like Darwin from First Class. And when characters are fairly vanilla in their abilities, that's where I think it gets tough, where you have to like really, really try to dig into what 4 things and 1 or 2 passives can you have for a character. And then you also have to, like, I would go to Goofy, I'm thinking of this, how easy is that to code? Like, is it capable? So yeah, I think that's another balance thing there, is like, can the game actually support what you want the character to do? Well, maybe that's kind of leading into this question. How do you balance new effects for the characters and old effects that are reused? According to the general game staff, in my opinion, it comes down to, for one thing, the mechanics of the character. What are you going to do with that character? Once you have an idea, then you have to start to plan the effects of the character around that. Wild Rider says, when I create a new character kit, I always have another tab open to the Redux wiki, so I can look at how stuff was done in the original game and how it was designed. I personally feel this helps maintain the spirit of the original devs when developing kits, which hopefully also means they're balanced. By the way, the spirit of the original devs is also a very, very big thing for the artists and the writers. BM has always, always, always banged the gavel and said, we keep MAA alive in MAAR. And the only thing that he wanted as a deviation there is not to shoehorn in villains as playable characters simply because they're popular or over, to use a wrestling term. The example that is always given for that is Sabretooth is a good guy because there's a bomb in his head. That was called a shoehorn or heavy-handed, and that was always one thing that BM said we weren't going to do. We weren't just going to give people Thanos because other games have Thanos and people want to play with them. They have to be properly heroic to redeem themselves. So the writers also aside from the development team, like to keep the original devs in the back of their head, sort of as like the devil and the angel on your shoulder, your conscience, everything. That being said, the current state of development, all new character kits are purely on paper and have not been tested in the engine, so it's fully possible that additional balancing will be needed once testing is begun. If the original game has an effect that I require for a kit, perfect, says Metacron. I'll recycle those. However, sometimes they have a secondary trait I don't need, or maybe character or gear exclusive. In order to balance those kits, I usually try to make them focus on a particular characteristic of the character. For example, one of his latest creations weighs heavily on disorienting effects, which means that another character or gear that counters those effects will balance the situation. So, introduce a disease and introduce a cure at the same time. Very interesting. I like that, because that is proper meta-ing, if you wanted to put it in a PvP term. We don't necessarily know if Playdom ever did that. Like, if they created a meta, say the Hugins Eye, where people would dodge all the time and physical attacks would often fail and whiff. Did they know ahead of time, well, we'll give it a season and then we'll introduce a piece of gear that shuts down the Hugins Eye, or a really good psychic range weapon that'll go past it? We don't know if they did that, but you can see here from Metacron that he's basically saying, yeah, we're taking that into account. Question 3, will gold items be changed at all, or the gold obtain rate be increased? The answer is that items that came with gold purchases will be released as Season 3 and 4 Mastery rewards, says Bridget Rocks. The gold drop rate will increase as well, since we do not have any economic interest in mind, and we wouldn't be able to either way. We're not going to be focusing on money-making mechanics. To ease your mind at that could never, ever, 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 ever change, because the game is local to you. So there could never come a point in time where Goofy wrings his hands and ties the damsel in distress up to the tracks and goes and curls a handlebar mustache and says, well, I'm going to start charging now. It's impossible, because if you gave Goofy $10 and you're like, okay, Goofy, here's $10, give me 500 gold, there wouldn't be a way of getting it to the game. The game exists in a closed container. It is an offline game that does not connect to the net. So it's not like Goofy could reach into your game but not mine and give you 500 gold because you paid and not me. There's a game out there called Rusty Hearts that was rebirthed, and it's involved in like some ETH and cryptocurrency. They could do that there because there's a server, there's a central server and a host and everything. And they can just say, okay, account A gave us 100 crypto coins. Let's give that person like a piece of gear. That is impossible for Goofy to do. So Goofy can never exist long enough to become the villain. To paraphrase that phrase over there. It can't happen. So rest assured, the team's never going to get greedy. Will there be new ISO 8? The answer from Kelvin is, if you mean new E or A ISOs, absolutely, definitely yes. Bridget Rock says, if you mean new U ISOs, yes as well. Wild Rider says, if you mean regular ISO 8s, that's a definite no. We aren't changing that part of the game. What he means there is fat crystal, chunky crystal, the normal very spiky starburst crystals there, the sliver or shard ones, that's the ones he's talking about, the stat ones. Panda says, if you mean a new form of ISO 8, well, who's to say? And then question 5 here, still under development, how are different kits made? How common are collaborations? So the first answer is, we usually have a list of characters to be made, and then different devs will take on any characters they want to. If there is more than one ideas for the same character, then the ideas will be combined into a kit. As for collaborations, we've done a few in the past, and we plan to do more in the future, says Kelvin. And Panda says, most of the time devs tend to tackle singular kits. And if multiple devs do the same kit, there's an amalgamation process to merge the kits as smoothly as possible. Usually kits share ideas, they just aren't executed at the same time, so merging is easier than it seems. Collaborations with the entire team occur occasionally. Kelvin and I recently, meeting Kelvin and Panda, have been doing kits together for a long time and been doing some great work for later season 3 content. And then the final question here for the development team: how would you describe your kit style? Kelvin says, my kit style is more of a try to make a different character unique from others, in the sense that I try to make each character different from a kit mechanic. For example, if a character has a unique effect, how can I come up with a kit idea that revolves around that effect? Or is there a mechanic that hasn't been utilized as the forefront of a kit? Yes. And if yes, how can we utilize it in that way? I think a good example that I could give there is, like, you see a lot of fire people burning, you see a lot of bleeding people, and internal bleeding, but how interesting would it be to make a character that freezes or makes use of like that waterlogged and drowning debuff and everything? And then, okay, if somebody's going to be nautical themed, what other things can you work into that? Metacron says, as I mentioned before, unless I have an original idea for a new mechanic, I try to focus on a single skill or effect that would be representative of that character's powers. Do they have claws? And go slash people. Let's focus on bleeding effects, ways to enhance them, exploit them. Do they adapt to different situations and adapt their fighting style? Me with Darwin. Then I'll think of an original way for them to switch skills. And then finally, Panda says, I like to bend what is traditional in my kits. I tend not to like monoclass heroes. I like to make heroes who have multiple classes through one way or another, and I like to focus on concepts that aren't seen. Triton, for example, with his water-based kit. So the development staff is done, and now we're moving on to some general questions, and I think this will be a part a lot of people might find their questions will get answered. Will MAAR have original characters that exist beyond Night America and, say, Marvel Future Fights? Luna and because if you remember, the Capiversary injected multiple Captain Americas through different games. So Future Fight got Sharog, we got Night America, Contest of Champions got Civil Warrior, and MA2 got Steampunk Captain over there. Steampunk Cap actually was pretty cool with the steampunk goggles and the shield that could like mechanically expand and contract and everything. I'm as a fan of the game, I'm interested in the answer to this question. The game staff as a whole says it's not within the scope of the Redux project to populate it with original characters such as Night America. That is a warning on the Facebook forums. No, Mugen. That also applies to no, you're not going to see Batman or Superman or E Honda appearing as a character in the game. But here you can also see that other Marvel characters or Marvel themed characters, for example, Luna Snow, you're not going to see it populated by those OC or original characters. This is one of those situations where, as part of the original Playdom game, which the team acknowledges as part of the game, but have chosen not to follow that path. Wild Rider says, Ken gave a pretty definitive answer for the question. The only thing I'd like to add is that original characters from other Marvel games are not out of the question. If we like an original character from another Contest of Champions or Marvel Strike Force or Marvel Future Fight, we may consider incorporating them. So, and this is not said from a person who knows better or doesn't know better, they are saying maybe you would see Luna Snow in Marvel Avengers Alliance Redux. That's cool. As a fan, I'm happy to hear something like that. In Future Fight, Luna is very powerful. Sharog is also very powerful and has a lot of really good uniforms. How long do you guys plan to run Redux for? Goofy says, I'll support the content creation team as long as they're willing to come up with stories and characters. Panda says, as long as there's a will, there's a way. We've been doing it for 5 years. I don't intend to leave anytime soon. Question 3. After all the hours of work, do you think you'll be able to enjoy the game do you think you'll be able to, and how do you think you'll be able to still enjoy the game, and do you think you'll be able to enjoy it? It's kind of a little repetitive there. Yeah, this is a very good question, because I can tell you I was an avid reader in childhood and everything, and then got to college and had to do so much reading for my courses. I stopped reading for fun for a little while. Yeah, I can. This is a very, very serious brain buster question for people. Like, if you have to dig into the game so much to code and create and content development and create artistry and sprites, are you gonna want to enjoy the game as enjoyment when the day is done and the work is done? This is a very good question. Goofy says, I still enjoy it even in the testing phase. Seeing our work come together is an amazing thing. BR says, absolutely. That's why we're doing this, because we're players in the first place. Not only am I the president of Hair Club for Men, I'm also a client. All the steps to get here still feel like it's in stasis during development. Once assembled, it feels fully fleshed out to us. Kirby says, probably not as much as the zealotry of when MAA was around, especially given that I'm pretty busy, but I will be near tears once the final product arrives. I grew up with MAA, and I've grown more working on Redux. This is a little different for me, as I was a full-ass grown adult at the time that I was playing the original MAA, so I didn't have the childhood thing there, but I've seen it so much in comments on Discord and Facebook and on the videos that I do, and channel comments and everything. The team is rebirthing people's, like, just into double digits childhood or middle to late teen years, and to be able to play it again as grown adults and everything is really hitting people in the feels. And I mean, I gotta admit, that very first alpha where I could watch Sif be animated with the stabs or hear Psylocke's very unique psionic blade sound effects, I mean, I was tearing up when I got to do that again. And in those early betas, like seeing Black Panther's kicks and his animations, like the kick, swipe, swipe, and all of that, it just yeah, was absolutely, it was emotional to me, and I didn't have that growing up with it thing. It was just a regular part of my adulthood, but still a very big part of it. Panda says, it doesn't matter if it's 5, 10, or 20 years. The minute I get access to play the new content, I'm gunning for it. I'm beyond excited to play through our own story, not just write it. Question 4. What hero and or villain best represented MAA, and who worst represented it? So, we've got 2 paragraphs here. I don't know if this first 2 are both Wild Rider, but I'll think that they are. Wild Rider says, it's honestly a really hard question to answer, since Playdom did a really good job overall of representing characters in their writing and their kits. If I had to pick a favorite, I'd be tied between Rocket Raccoon and Groot, since both had clear and distinct characterizations in their dialogue and kits. Oh, I am Groot. For the worst, I'd have to say it's a tie between Whiplash and Absorbing Man. It seems like some wires got crossed regarding Whiplash, since his character and bio and dialogue don't align with the original game, which they tried to fix in Season 3 of Redux. His moveset was fine, though. Absorbing Man had the opposite problem, that his kit was really underwhelming for such a variable power set, and it's a shame that more wasn't done with his kit. If I can inject a favorite hero, I'd probably have to say Molly. I thoroughly enjoyed my Heroic Age Iron Fist and Molly days in offense on PvP. Loved that time period. Loved making gear around it. Loved what I did to Molly with the Emerald Prism. And that is my throwback to Kingfisher, and the Emerald Prism and Black Bolt and Thing made Thing invincible in PvP. That is my origin story, was that video right there. And that goddamn Emerald Prism. So when we had the free action Emerald Prism come around, Molly Hayes all the way. I thought Molly Hayes was fantastic. I thought she was written funny. The battle with Punisher. The fact that my own girlfriend enjoys coffee just as much. I mean, she was a former barista at one point, so she's very big into coffee. And Molly would like coffee, go, 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 go. and be all hyper and bouncing off a wall. So I would tie the coffee aspect to my own girlfriend, which breathes some life into Molly. But yeah, Molly has always been a favorite of mine from MAA because of how she was presented. And when the Runaways came out as a show, she was the weakest represented of the group, and she was the character I disliked the most from the show and was very disappointed in it. For me, I'd have to say MAA. And the worst representation, yeah, maybe Whiplash or even Cammy, because, like, who the fuck was Cammy? Kirby says, I always love Wanda and Taskmaster's kits. The former kept adding more and more ways to take advantage of chaos, while the latter felt like a perfect representation of his abilities. Worst represented, I'm not too sure, but Storm, because of her massive power in the comics, she came off as weak. And everything Crystal does is better. Ooh, that's harsh. Throwing Storm under the bus to Crystal. Eesh. How did MAAR start? Ooh, this is a good one. So this is Goofy Troll. This whole section's him. Goofy says, over 5 years ago, I was searching for information on Avengers Alliance. I ran across a video about the now dead saviors of the multiverse. I joined the Discord in the hopes of just helping get the game running again. I messed with some sprite recoloring and writing. So that sprite recoloring was our original method of avoiding IP infringement back in the day. When it became apparent saviors weren't going to go anywhere, I was able to find somebody with the original assets. Shout out to Agent CK, Agent Chris Cassay. I did not ask where he got them from. When I started messing with setting up a proof of concept, I got the basic combat scene going, and it really just spiraled from there. I've taken a couple breaks when things got overwhelming in the real world, but the amazing crew helped it together, and I can say they did soldier on in those times where Goofy was very busy. They just kept going. Nobody in the project ever gave up because Goofy had real life to take care of, and that's a testament to everybody that works on this. Question 6. How does it feel to work on pre-existing work and not as much creative freedom as starting from scratch? Goofy says it's a great learning experience. I actually have a second game I'm working on now, a couple hours a week, as well as other things. I know finishing this, I will have learned a lot. Ken says plenty of room creatively, and even possibly more room comparably to Playdom's run due to the oversight that it was subject to during the course of the original MAA. The goalposts are now self-imposed, but the goal is to respect and not bring harm to Marvel's intellectual property. So that means you're not going to see some crazy hero named Tits McGee who fires, what were the fembots from Austin Powers. You're not going to have booby fembots with, like, freezing rays in one and, like, flame rays in the other. In my opinion, says Bridget Rocks, it's actually better to work within the scopes of something that was not only done by professionals but also worked for the players and the fans. We know the game was popular, and we know the game was good. All we have to do is keep it on that right track. Panda says, it helps more than it hurts, to be honest. It gives us structure, and it gives us the base to work off of while listening to what they did and didn't work in the original. How does the team remain motivated despite no money being received? Honest question. Goofy says, I have no problems with it, but the biggest motivation I get is from all the support that everybody gives him and the team. This is why it is extremely important to me on Facebook, on Discord, on my videos, that people not crap on this game. It could take somebody saying something extremely wrong to just piss off one or two members of the team and be like, that's it, I'm not doing it anymore for these ungrateful people. Like this person who really, really, really wants live PvP and won't take no for an answer, doesn't understand why it can't happen and why we're not having client-to-client connectivity or client-to-server connectivity. It's like, oh, other games do it and blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? The game isn't. Fuck off. The support Goofy receives from the community, the fundraising drive that we had a while back that got the figures created and painted for him, this touches Goofy, and you're hearing it from him directly over here. So please continue to give him love, and everybody else on the team that is involved with this from top to bottom. Panda says, love of the game, the community, and the memories. I was 9 when MAA dropped, so that's kind of what we were talking about here. I played from day one and went through some of the hardest years of my life, and MAA was there. It connected me to online friends and it helped me go through a lonely childhood, and those friends are who told me about this project, and it's why I'm here today. It's the reason I haven't been alone a day in 11 years, and I can never stop being motivated. Diabetic Kirby says the game was a big part of my formative years. I was 14. Again, mentioned this a bit ago. I told you this impacts people this way. I was 14 when it came out and getting reintroduced to Marvel after being a fan as a kid, so this project means a lot to me, meaning Kirby. Oh no, I'm sorry, this is Bridget Rocks. I thankfully have a job that gives me money that I need to subsist, but this is a passion project and that inspires them. Kirby here says passion. We may go through stuff behind the scenes that keeps us away for a little bit, but we all believe in what the game was and what it can be. Question 8 out of a remaining 13 questions. How will the flow of unlocks work? Goofy says it's all based on unlocking missions, which is based on the original dates that things were released in the game. Spec Ops 1 has to come out after Chapter 7, so you'll have to unlock Chapter 7 Mission 1 to get Spec Ops 1. Other things released before Chapter 8 will be spread out across other missions up to Mission 5 and a chapter. Question 9. How similar will PvAI be to the original experience? Goofy says, only time will tell. It's one of the few major things that will be left for Beta 6. Hopefully it would still be challenging and enjoyable. What characters would you like to include if possible? Kirby says, the 3 misses. Magic for Agatha Harkness, Wong, and Wiccan. Oh, okay. For 3 magic users, Agatha Harkness, Wong, and Wiccan. For monsters, Werewolf by Night, Man-Thing, and Encantu, the Living Mummy. And for mutants, Enel, Exodus, and Polaris. Yeah, Polaris has got a lot of popularity lately. She's in Marvel Snap. She's in Future Fight. No, Strike Force, excuse me. That's cool. Panda says Negasonic, Teenage Warhead, and Yukio. Aw, they're such a cute couple. I love Deadpool 2 so much, and I just want them so bad. Yeah, Negasonic has love in Strike Force and Snap. Yukio is not really represented anywhere. I can definitely see some passes between the two. Negasonic is represented in Strike Force is that youthful teen that Deadpool accuses her, like her idle animation, she'll just hold up her hand, type on her phone a little bit, and then put the phone away and like look forward again, like, yeah, okay, let's go. This would be fun to see. How many battles can you do in a day? For question 11. And Bridget, so Goofy answers the first part here. I could easily see somebody playing over 100 battles a day if they want to. Spec Ops and PvP will not run on energy. So if you do run out of energy, you'll be able to play those while your energy replenishes. Bridget Rock says, well, on top of what Goofy said, completing a battle will reduce the timer for energy to recharge. So you will be rewarded by actually playing. The answer is a lot more than the original. Question 12. So we're getting near the end here. How did you distribute work amongst the teams? Panda says the team leads are in constant communication about which teams have which duties. From there, each team generally throws out the needed tasks at a time and either delegates people to certain tasks or asks people to sign up. And finally, question 13. How do new characters get selected? Kirby says it's a mix of everything. There are a few that we came up with a smaller story because we love the characters, or we have a story that could expand a whole section of the Redux universe, and new characters fit in with where we want them to be. I can even think of a couple that were added because there was an ability outside of writing side to create the character, and it was an opportunity that couldn't be passed up. We try to have them fit a narrative rather than let the characters define the narrative. Sometimes that wasn't the case, but mostly we tried to let the story dictate who gets released when. The dev team also gets input for characters when a narrative isn't needing new characters or has a selection of characters that make sense. For example, we revealed that Jennifer Kale was a dev's choice where each dev got to choose any hero that they wanted that didn't require a story to be released. and then the devs would vote on their favorite options that isn't their own. Jennifer Kale won and is now slotted for season 3. So I appreciate everybody making it this far. A link to the Q&A. Yeah, I may host the document myself just for the protection of where it is currently hosted. So it will be linked down below, as long as the standard links of 5.01, the Facebook, the Discord. And again, one last thing for the hints for the 2 characters coming in 5.2. Character number 1 has an audio clue of this character said that Wolverine is a brawler and not a particularly good fighter and relies on his healing factor to survive, and the person saying this feels that they are a better fighter because of that. Also, here is a visual clue as to who that character is. If you know who this is, then you know who the character is. Clue. Whoa. Oh, okay. Whoops. Huh. Yep, sorry about that. Wrong thing. Okay. Clue number 1 for the second character. If you think of what this word is, and now think of what this is. So that's clue number 1 for character number 2. And here, clue 2 for character 2. Maybe somewhere on this page is a reference to the character. Here somewhere is a reference to the character. And then finally, here's Wolverine. Wolverine is something specific. What is Wolverine? And then you can go ahead and figure out that second clue for the second character. So I've definitely occupied your time long enough. This is Napalm Dawn signing off. Hope you enjoyed the Q&A period here with the team. Hope your main questions were answered. And hopefully you guys will be able to figure out the 2 characters that will be available in 5.2 that were not in 5.01. Please leave your references to the characters down below and what you think the solves were for the puzzles. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good weekend.